everybody, welcome back to Mentour and yet another video podcast. I hope you're all doing great. Very welcome to all you new joiners to the channel. It's always great to see you here. So, today we are going to be talking about rapid depressurization and emergency descent. So this is the third video in my series about failure management within the aviation industry. As always, at the end, make sure that you send in your questions and your suggestions about future content and what you thought about this video, and also make sure that you share this video if you can on social media like Facebook, Twitter, or whatever you think that it would be appreciated, because I really need some help to kind of keep this channel growing and get more and more people involved in what we're going to be talking about. So, rapid depressurization. What is it? Well, to keep it short, I'm just going to explain a little bit about how things work. So, in order for people to be able to survive at higher altitudes, we need to be able to breathe. And you can do this in an aircraft in two different ways. Either you can be sitting with an oxygen mask, breathing pressurized oxygen at higher altitude in order to get the proper amount of oxygen into your blood. Or you could do what most modern airliners do, which is to pressurize the air inside of the cabin in order to fix so that the pressure in the air inside of the aircraft is more or less the same as it would be on the surface. It's not going to be exactly like on the surface, but it's going to simulate being at about 7,000 or 8,000 feet. So that's what we do. That's what you do in an ordinary airliner, because it's really hard to sit with an oxygen mask if you're going to be speaking to your wife or drinking a cup of coffee. So this is by far the most easy way of making the environment habitable inside of an aircraft at 40,000 feet. Now, the way that we do this is that we use pressurized air from the engines to pump into the aircraft to fix that pressure at the exact pressure that we want it to be. And then we regulate how much air we're letting out of the aircraft through a big valve at the back of the aircraft called the outflow valve. This system works great as long as the pressurization system is working well, and as long as there is no big holes or any big ruptures in the aircraft structure. From time to time, there are failures with the pressurization system. Most of the time it has to do with the outflow valve not functioning the way it should, or one of the two controllers not working the way it should. And most of the times it's perfectly fixable. As with always, I've been talking about this before, we always have a redundant system, so if one system fails, the other system takes over, and that's the same when it comes to the pressurization system controllers and so on. But from time to time, and I'm sure you've heard about this, from time to time the system does fail, or there is a catastrophic failure of the aircraft structure. Basically, there's a hole somewhere, or there's a door that blows out or something like that. And if that happens, we lose pressurization within the aircraft. So what do? First of all, why is it important to do anything? Well, like I've been saying before, it's if the pressurization is lost, very, very quickly the pressure inside of the aircraft is going to be the same as on the outside of the aircraft. And if that happens, people will be able to breathe, but there will not be enough oxygen to kind of fill your bloodstream with the amount of oxygen that is needed, and you will be suffering from hypoxia very quickly. So how quickly does this happen? Well, it differs with the altitude. So if you're flying at about 40,000 feet, you will have about 15 seconds before you will be rendered close to unconscious and not being able to do anything. This time is called time of useful consciousness. So at 40,000 feet it's about 15 seconds, 35,000 feet you have about 30 seconds, and then it increases the lower you get. So around 15,000 feet you will have more than 30 minutes of time of useful consciousness. So it's really, really important, if we would have a failure of the pressurization system, to get down to lower altitudes as quickly as possible. So, what's the first thing that's going to happen? Well, we in the cockpit have indications of the cabin altitude. So we can see what the cabin altitude is doing, and we know approximately where it's supposed to be. We also can see the differential pressure, which is the difference between the outside pressure and the inside pressure. This is something that we're monitoring regularly. As we're climbing out, we're looking at this every 10,000 feet. We're climbing, we're making sure that everything is doing well. And then we also have a system that is automatically controlling the pressurization, so that if something would happen rapidly, we would be warned about it. So if we're sitting, flying along as we do, drinking a cup of coffee, watching the beautiful views outside, and then all of a sudden this system detects that the cabin altitude is rising and it's passing 10,000 feet. 10,000 feet is important to remember. Above 10,000 feet, that's when people generally start having problems with hypoxia. So at 10,000 feet, there is a warning going off in the cockpit. And it's a monotone warning. It sounds like bam, 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 continuously like that, okay? The warnings might sound differently in different aircraft types, but they will all have a similar type of warning. So whenever a pilot hears this while he or she is airborne, there's the first thing to do. There's only one thing to do, and that is very, very quickly get the oxygen mask on. So we each have our own oxygen mask sitting on the side, very readily reachable. So whenever this warning goes off while we're airborne, the important thing is to make sure that you get the oxygen mask on as quickly as possible. Because of that, we're talking about 15 seconds, so it's very, very little time you have in order to get it on and get the oxygen selected to 100% in order to get that precious oxygen coming in. We practice this a lot in the simulator, because in the simulator, of course, we can't simulate things like pain, ear pain, sinus pain, and things but that will happen in the aircraft. So, of course, if you've ever had problems with sinuses, if you've been in an aircraft, you know that it can hurt very, very badly. The same thing can happen if you have a rapid depressurization, because this will happen very quickly and you won't have time to kind of equalize the pressure as you're used to. So even if you don't have a cold, it's very likely that you will feel a bit of pain. Another thing that might happen if we're talking about a rupture in the aircraft skin, for example, is that if it's losing pressure very quickly, it will also, all the air will rush towards the opening, and it will suck with it things like dust on the floor, little grains of sand, things like that, and that can very easily get into your eyes. So all of this counted together, it can be a very, very unpleasant experience, okay? So it's really important that we remember, and it's in our motoric memory, that as soon as you hear that warning, first thing we do is put the masks on, okay? So that's the first thing. Once the masks are on, the next thing is to establish communication between each other, because it's really, really hard to communicate with these masks on. Generally, we have intercom connected to our headsets. We can't really use intercom with this, because it will be like two Darth Vaders trying to communicate with each other. So we turn off the intercom and we switch over on our audio control panel, which is the panel that controls our audio output. We switch it over from boom to mask, so that the little microphone inside of the masks get activated and we can start talking to each other. So that's the second thing that we do, establish crew communication. Now, the next thing that we want to do is our memory items. Now, remember I spoke to you about memory items in a previous podcast. Memory items are items of a non-normal checklist that needs to be actioned quickly. So most of the time, we never need to do things very, very quickly in an aircraft. You always have time to take a checklist up and read exactly what you're supposed to do and why you're supposed to do it. But there are a few occasions where we have to act quickly. One of them is this. So we want to try to, now we've managed to get our oxygen on, so we are now safe, but we also want to make sure that the rest of the crew and the passengers are safe. And this needs to be done fairly quickly, which means we have memory items. They are split between the captain and first officer. So no matter who is pilot flying and who is pilot monitoring in this situation, we will now divide our part into a captain part and a first officer part. So the first officer goes immediately up to the pressurization panel, which is located just above him or her on the overhead panel. Switches over the pressurization control from automatic to manual. and then tries to close the outflow valve. And the reason that he or she is doing this is because most of the time when we have pressurization problems, it is because of that outflow valve opening and staying open by itself. And it's a huge opening and can depressurize the aircraft very quickly. So by doing this, switching it from automatic to manual and then force closing the outflow valve, hopefully we can regain control over the pressurization system. And that's the priority here. So the pressurization selector over to manual, outflow valve close, and then evaluate the situation. So the first officer will be looking up, checking so that the pressurization system is doing what it's supposed to be doing. And what he or she should be seeing at that point is a cabin descend. Okay, it's supposed to, if this action has sorted the problem out, we now close the outflow valve and the aircraft is supposed to start to pressurize, and when it pressurizes, the cabin altitude goes down. So if the cabin is not descending, it's actually staying the same or increasing in altitude, then the problem has not been fixed. It's something else that's wrong, and this needs to be clearly communicated. So the captain will generally ask, do you have the cabin under control? And the first officer will look, try to evaluate it, and say, yes, it seems to be under control, it's descending, or no, I do not have it under control. Now, the next step is fully dependent on whether or not you have control or not, because we want to try to avoid an emergency descent. An emergency descent is not something that you do lightly, because it is a maneuver that's going to scare the passengers. It is also going to affect traffic around us. So if we have traffic below us, for example, our traffic on our sides, they might be affected by the maneuver. So we do not do an emergency descent unless we have a continuous problem with our pressurization. And I want to stress this because in the simulator, when this is being practiced, they are normally practiced together. So you have a rapid depressurization and an emergency descent, but they do not have to come together. If you happen to sort the problem out by closing the alpha valve, then there's no need for an emergency descent. There might be a need for a descent anyway, but under more controlled forms. Okay, so I want to make that point right now. Anyway, in this scenario, the first officer does not manage to sort the problem out. So there's something else that is either keeping the alpha valve open, or there is some other rupture or open door or something like that. So the pressurization is not normal. Then the captain will announce that we'll have to do an emergency descent. Okay. Then the memory items goes from rapid depressurization, which has now been done, to emergency descent. The first officer will then continue up and switch on the passenger oxygen. The passenger oxygen should already be switched on in this case, because that is automatically open. That's those masks that falls out. They open by themselves when the cabin altitude reaches around 13,000 feet. But we do it anyway just to make sure that the masks are actually down, so that the passengers in the back have a chance to get their oxygen masks on. The next thing is to switch the fasten seatbelts on. That's also normally happen automatic when the system feels a rapid depressurization. It will switch the belts on, providing that the switch is in auto. However, we do it anyway to make sure that it's on. Proceed down, put the engine start switches to continuous, and then switch all of the lights on. And the reason we're doing that is because we're now going to do a emergency descent, which means we're going to rapidly be descending. We want to be able to be as visible as possible for all aircraft around us. Then the first officer continues down onto the central pedestal, where they switch the transponder over to our emergency code. And the emergency code on the transponder is 7700. A transponder is a little radio device that is sending out blips to the radar for the air traffic controllers. And the air traffic controllers can see us as a little blip, and depending on what code we have, they can identify us. But whenever we switch it over to 7700, it lights up like a Christmas tree, and the air traffic controllers can now see that someone is squawking emergency, and that will give their full attention to that aircraft. So once that is done, the first officer will of course go up and communicate with ATC. So they will say, whatever the call sign is, Mayday, 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 call sign, We have an emergency descent, and we are descending to 10,000 feet, or the MSA. If you're over a really high mountainous terrain, you can't descend down to 10,000 feet, so you might have to descend to 12,000 feet or 13,000 feet. You'll have your flight plan, and on the flight plan generally the safety heights are stated, but you should have an okay situational awareness about where you are anyway. So if you are over the Alps, you know that you're going to have to be careful with descending. But if you are over Germany somewhere, you know, on the northern side, then 10,000 feet would generally be a safe altitude to descend to. So state that to ATC and ask for local QNH. Local QNH is the pressurization setting, which is on the ground. We set that in order to make sure that the aircraft is descending down to 10,000 feet above the ground and not flight level 100, which might be more than 10,000 feet above the ground. So we always set QNH. Once we have obtained the local QNH, we set it on both sides and we continue our descent. Then the first officer is going for the QNH checklist. Start reading the checklist out loud so that the captain can listen to what's going on, and actioning the rapid depressurization first, and then once that's done, into the emergency descent and proceeding with the checklist as far as possible. He or she is also calling out every 10,000 feet descending and 2,000 feet to go to our level off and 1,000 feet to go to our level off. All right. So that's the first officer's job at this point. We're doing all of these things. The first things are done fairly quickly, and then the reading of the checklist is done while we're descending now. But as of now, we haven't started our descent yet, because the captain is the one who is going to fly the aircraft. So when he or she has announced that we're going to do an emergency descent, he or she automatically, the captain automatically becomes pilot of flying and does the actual maneuver. The first thing that he or she does before doing anything else is going on to the PA system and calling out emergency descent, emergency descent, emergency descent, okay, 3 times. The reason for this is that the cabin crew is supposed to react. They probably reacted already because of the masks dropping and stuff, but when they hear this, it means that they will be sitting down wherever they are. There is a spare mask in each of the rows. On each of the sides of the rows there is a spare mask, and they will take that mask so that they also get oxygen during the emergency descent maneuver. So it's really, really crucial that that call is being made. The next thing to do is the captain will go up to his mode control panel, which is what's controlling the autopilot, which is up on top of the dashboard. And they will wind the altitude down. They don't have to set it exactly, just wind it down a couple of times. We keep the autopilot engaged. They will press level change. They will speed up. Normally we speed up to our maximum speed, which is close to 340 knots, or Mach 0.82. Unless we have an idea that we think that there might be something structurally wrong with the aircraft. If there's something, if we have heard a bang and we feel vibrations and stuff like that, then we won't increase the speed. We'll just maintain the speed. But if we don't think so, if there's no indications of it, we'll put the speed up, and the reason for that is that within level change, the aircraft will want to try to achieve that speed by lowering the nose. So when level change, if you bring the speed back, it's going to descend faster. So wind it down, level change, possibly speed up, and then we go down to our central pedestal and we close the thrust levers and we bring the speed brake up to the flight detent position. Okay. By doing that in this order, we don't have to stress it, but you do it fairly expeditiously. The aircraft is now descending as quickly as possible. Okay. Then, once this is done, then we go up and we fine-tune the MCP, which means that we're now setting 10,000 feet or the MSA, whichever is higher. We bring the speed back to what we have, and we also, and I've forgotten to mention this in the beginning, we're contemplating a turn. A turn normally we turn 45 degrees left or right if we're on an airway, and the reason for that is that we want to try to avoid any traffic that might be located under us. If we're on a direct routing, which means that the ATC has told us to go not following these airways that we have been filed at, but we're going direct to a point, then it might not be an idea to turn. But generally speaking, most airlines has as a procedure to turn 45 degrees left or right and tell ATC that they're doing so. So we're now descending quickly. We're turning off. We're looking outside for traffic. Of course, we want to avoid to fly into anyone else because this is a maneuver that hasn't been cleared by ATC. It's something we do in order to get down into breathable air as quickly as possible. So it's an emergency maneuver. As we're now descending, the first officer, the captain, is listening to the first officer doing the memory items, making sure as well that none of us is becoming incapacitated. So we're checking out for each other, looking so that everyone is doing what they're supposed to do. And the captain is concentrating on flying the aircraft, so putting engine anti-ice on if we're entering clouds, things like that. While we're constantly communicating with each other to the best of our capacity. When the captain hears 2 to go by the first officer, we can start bringing back the speed. Bringing back the speed to maybe something like 250 knots or so, which is the maximum speed below flight 100. And 1 to go, we're also lowering the speed brake. And while doing so, the aircraft will now not descend as quickly. It will start to bring the nose up and do a nice level off at 10,000 feet. When we level off, we'll both look up and we'll check what the cabin is doing. The cabin is generally behind the aircraft because there's a bit of a leak rate. But we'll evaluate if the cabin has actually reached 10,000 feet. If it hasn't, we'll continue to descend, maybe down to 8,000 feet. Make sure that the cabin altitude is down below 10,000 feet. Okay? Once we are satisfied that the cabin altitude is below 10,000 feet, then it's time to check if the air is breathable. And the way that most airlines do this is the first officers tries first. So they will hand over whatever radio they have. So they have the telling, okay, so Captain, you have the radio. I'm going to take the mask off and take the headset off again. Mask off. Check the air. Breathe a little bit. If they feel anything wrong with it, they put the mask back on again. If they feel that it's fine and it's breathable, then they can bring the mask back down, switch the audio control panel back onto boom, put the headset back on again, and tell the captain that, yeah, it's fine. I feel fine. In which case, the captain can do exactly the same. So hand over the controls to the first officer and the radio, take off the mask, switch their audio control panel, and then they can start communicating. So, at this point, when they both have taken their masks off and they realize everything is fine, they want to complete what's left of the checklist to make sure that nothing has been forgotten. And then the captain will let the first officer maintain control and call number 1 to the flight deck in our company. It might be a different call in a different company, but it will be something similar. Very important to make that call, because that call in this particular situation means to the cabin crew that the air is breathable and that they can take the masks off and they can come forward into the forward galley to listen to the captain and await further instructions. So when we do this in the sim, the exercise is normally finished when you get to this point. In reality, it has just begun. Okay, so the next thing that's going to happen is that the captain is going to talk to number 1, make sure that she's okay, that the crew is okay, and ask how is the status in the cabin. Very important to check this, because they will be your eyes and ears in the cabin. So they will be able to say, if they've seen a hole in the cabin, if there's a door missing, do we have any injuries on board, how is people reacting, and so on. So you want to have a proper briefing with the cabin crew about what's going on, how are they feeling, and so on, because depending on what they say, you might have to change your plan about how you're going forward. So if we're going to this example here, nothing really bad has happened. So everyone is more or less okay. There might be people complaining about ear pains and stuff, but there's been no fatalities, no severe injuries. So in that case, the captain will say, all right, I'm going to come back to you with a NITS brief. Remember the NITS? Nature, intention, time, and special procedures. They will happen later on, because now we have to go in and we have to speak in the flight deck about how we are going to proceed. What are we going to do next? So, back into the flight deck, inform the first officer about what's going on, how is things going in the cabin, so on. And then we will start doing our procedure when it comes to decision making. All airlines have different modules for this. We have something called PIOC, which stands for what's the problem, what kind of information do we have, what kind of options do we have, we select the best option, we execute it, and then we continuously evaluate it. So that's why it's called PIOC. So gather information, that includes talking to the cabin, includes taking weather for the airports around, discussing what's best to do, talk to ATC. And then once we've decided on where we want to go, we can also go into our flight management computer, our FMC, and put long range cruise in. Because remember, now we're down to 10,000 feet and we burn more fuel per nautical mile down there. So we might not have as far of a range as we had before. But we decide on an option, and we once we have decided on that, we communicate. I call the person back again, and we tell them, so are you ready for an ITSPs? Please listen carefully. And I will tell you, in nature, we've had a rapid depressurization and emergency descent, as you know. Intention is to go to this airport here. Time, we're looking at about 20 minutes until we land. Special procedures, I want you to keep the cabin secure, calm the passengers, keep them seated as we get down onto the ground, or something similar, depending on how it looks. And then I will make a PA to make sure, to calm the passengers down, let them know that everything is okay in the cockpit and that we're going towards whichever airport that we have decided. Then as we're descending, we can't descend as we normally do, because normally we would descend with fairly high rates. If you're doing that with an aircraft that doesn't have a functioning air conditioning system, the cabin would descend at the same rate as the aircraft does. So we might have to descend a bit slower in order to make it feel more comfortable for people in the back. And then we're basically just coming in, doing a normal approach maneuver. Might be a good idea to have a look at the pressurization system before you land, make sure that the cabin is properly depressurized, because depending on what fault it is, you might need to actually manually depressurize it in order to be able to open the doors. But generally after that, it's just landing, getting the emergency services to check the aircraft out and get the passengers off, get any medical attention to anyone that might be feeling unwell, and so on. So from there on, it's standard operating procedures. But that's it. That's how we do rapid depressurization emergency descent. I'm just taking this straight out of my memory now, so I might have been skipping some small items, but it gives you a little bit of a picture of how we're dealing with things. So I hope you've enjoyed this. As always, make sure that you subscribe, share this video with anyone you think might enjoy it, and I'll see you next time. Thank you.